You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, you are listening to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin, and I am here as promised with what the fuck is going on in Ukraine. As I stated in the last episode, this is a true crime podcast, and what's going on in Ukraine is a true crime. Full stop, it is a true crime what is going on there on a day-to-day basis. I'd actually been thinking about doing an episode like this for the last couple months, actually, because especially right after Russia began the initial invasion, actually started amassing troops on Ukraine's border, a lot of people that I know, listeners or friends, expressed that they didn't really understand what was going on. And if you don't understand or follow international relations, geospatial politics, anything like that, it can be really confusing, especially when countries have a really long and complex history. So I wanted to do sort of a primer episode, and by no means is this the full account of the history of Ukraine. This is a country that was taken over by Stalin in like the 1930s. Millions of people died and then turned right around. And in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded them and murdered millions of Ukrainians. This country has seen tragedy and tragedy after tragedy. Should we forget Chernobyl? But if you're looking for an in-depth history of Ukraine, this episode ain't it. This is going to be just from the last, say, 15 years or so with maybe some anecdotal stuff, but more of how did we get to where we are today. And then joining me on the second part of the episode is Iris, who many of you may know. She was actually in the Navy for many, many years, but she'll be joining me to kind of have a more laid back, candid discussion on our thoughts and feelings on all of this. And I had an absolute blast with her. But before we get into that, let's just go ahead and get our housekeeping out of the way. You're listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm the host, Robin. You can find us at WeSawTheDevil.com. From there, you can find us across all social media or just via our handle, guys. Pretty simple, We Saw the Devil. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. I would like to take a moment to talk about what Ukraine itself means to the West, means to Western Europe, America, Canada, what we generally refer to when we refer to the West. And to start, we have to talk about how we view Europe. And if you look at the countries going, say, west to east, the biggest players in this game, the biggest ones are allies that you may hear pretty frequently: France, Germany, Poland, Ukraine. Then in Europe, of course, Russia is our, let's face it, arch nemesis. Russia, bringing up Eastern Europe, is our arch nemesis. We went through the Cold War. They've had Putin. International relations between most of Western Europe, or quote unquote the West, that includes the United States, hasn't been very good for many, 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 many years. Now, going from west to east, we have France. Then we have Germany on its borders. German borders, right to the east, we have Poland, and then Ukraine. So Poland is sandwiched directly between Ukraine and Germany, which really makes it the stepping stone into Europe. If you read about the importance of Poland during World War II, that's fascinating on its own. Poland is largely flat. It has a lot of grain production. It's a very strategically important country, which is why Poland has been part of NATO since 1999. In 1996, President Bill Clinton called former Warsaw Pact countries and post-Soviet republics to join NATO and made that a huge, huge draw. So in 1999, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joined NATO. Of course, at that time, there was really massive opposition by Russia as well. And you have to understand why. The United States and its Western allies really want to add as many people to NATO as possible. What is NATO? NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the North Atlantic Alliance, and it's an intergovernmental military alliance. There are 28 members of NATO in Europe and then 2 in North America, which would be the United States and Canada. Why was NATO created in the first place? NATO was created in 1949 by the US, Canada, and a couple Western European countries to quite literally provide security to others against the Soviet Union. This was the entire purpose of NATO. Its sole purpose, its primary goal, was to act as a sort of deterrent to the threat of Soviet expansion in Europe after World War II. And they have operated adding random countries as they go. 1949 had 12 founding members: Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Canada, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, United Kingdom, United States. 1952 to 1990, we saw Greece, Turkey, Germany, and Spain join. 1999, as I said, Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. Between 2004 and 2009, a lot of Baltic, Eastern European countries joined. Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia. And then between 2017 and 2020, over those 3 years, Montenegro and North Macedonia. And as I said, NATO solely exists to prevent Soviet Union / now Russian expansion. And I think, as everyone is aware of right now, what that means is each country, NATO, provides mutual defense through military and political means if a member state is threatened by an external country. You may have heard the phrase Article 5 thrown around quite a bit since the invasion of Ukraine. The cornerstone of the alliance is laid out in Article 5 of the Charter. It says, "The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that, if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with the other parties, such actions as it deems necessary, including the use of armed forces to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area." Article 5 has only been invoked one other time before, and that was 9/11, when the United States was attacked. The attacks on September 11th, 2001. NATO meets frequently, and they had determined at that point that terrorism was in fact a risk that would potentially affect NATO security. The very evening of September 12th, just the day after, less than 24 hours after the attack, NATO met and invoked Article 5. And what that means is that they offered full support of the United States. By invoking Article 5, they showed their solidarity towards the United States and condemned the terror attacks. And then countries came in and assisted. There were several measures like enhanced intelligence sharing, weapons capabilities, increased security, extra attention to flight and airway clearances between NATO allies. And then the alliance as a whole was supposed to stand ready to deploy naval forces to the East Mediterranean and also Middle East. So it was a whole thing. Took less than 24 hours, invoked Article 5, and then boom, NATO had mobilized. How does Ukraine enter into all of this? Well, since the Cold War, even before, the United States and Western European allies, they want to take Ukraine and bring it right on over into the Western fold. Again, I implore you, if you're listening to this episode right now, please just look up a map of Ukraine. I'm Googling it myself right now. And if you look at Ukraine, again, on its eastern border is Russia. Literally Ukraine's northeast, east, and southeast border, that's all Russia. West is Poland. Again, Poland is the stepping stone to Europe. Poland is also a NATO country. The United States and its allies want to bring as many countries in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, into NATO as possible. Why? Because that allows them to share intelligence, to see what the fuck is going on, and have better eyes on Russia. It also prevents Russia, who obviously is very invasion heavy, to kind of act as a deterrent. Russian leader Putin, do you really want to do that? If you look right now at a map of Ukraine, of the countries in NATO, It's literally almost the entirety of Western Europe. And then bordering up along Russia, you have Russia, which is a massive, 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 massive country. Russia borders Ukraine, obviously, as well as Belarus, neither of which are members of NATO. Lithuania and Latvia are on Russia's western border as well. Those are all NATO countries. At the very, very top northwest, Russia borders Finland, whom you may have heard recently in the news. Finland and Sweden have just recently requested entry into NATO as well for the express purpose of, having some sort of defense from Russia. And how did Putin recently respond? By sending arms to its border with Finland. Ukraine had been in talks to join both the European Union and NATO, and NATO powers would be on Russia's front doorstep, and Ukraine would then economically align with Europe and the West. This has been a no-no and a no-go because for decades, Putin and Russian leaders have said, fuck you, fuck no, we will never allow this to happen, and we will do absolutely anything in our power to prevent it. Because what country, Russia, an autocracy to begin with, what sort of, authoritarian regime wants democracy or NATO on its doorstep with obvious intelligence capabilities and getting Western ideals closer to their populace? They don't want that to happen. The three main criteria for entry into NATO: a European nation must demonstrate a commitment to democracy, individual liberty, and support for the rule of law. Now, more on that in terms of Ukraine in a moment, but looking at it from, say, Iran, China, and Russia's viewpoint, all three of those things are really bad news. They don't want democracy, they don't want individual liberty, and they sure as shit don't want support for the rule of law unless it's a law that benefits them and controls the populace. That's all bad news. All of those countries stifle individual liberties. They don't have fair democratic elections. Most of them see the United States as like this big great devil invading countries to topple regimes and install democratic institutions. I mean, the argument can be made for that, and they are not necessarily wrong about that. We do frequently topple governments and install pro-American and pro-West leaders. That is something that the United States has done basically since its founding. And you and I may say, well, there's nothing evil or wrong with democracy. And I fully agree, but the fact of the matter is that these are brutal governments who don't want it. And they have been very vocal about not wanting it. They don't want the mere ideals influencing their populations. So starting in the mid-1990s, the Soviet Union became very, 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 very adamant against NATO expansion. A handful of states, as I've stated, joined in the 90s, and then a handful more joined between 2000 and today. As you recall me saying, Bill Clinton called in the 90s, 1996, for the Baltic states and the rest of the ones bordering Russia to come ahead and join NATO. And then we had a handful of states which did: Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. Pissed off Russia horribly. And Russia made threats. Fuck around and find out. So on April 3rd, 2008, NATO held a summit in Bucharest, Romania. It basically met to determine whether NATO would put a map in place or a membership action plan on the table for Georgia and Ukraine. After this meeting, consensus was blocked for both countries. This is something that George W. Bush had been screaming for. Let's get Ukraine and Georgia in NATO. George W. Bush was screaming for this. However, even though a general promise was made of a map, it was not given to either Georgia or Ukraine. In terms of Ukraine, it was blocked for three reasons. Like, their entry into NATO was blocked for three reasons. First, there was a very low level of public support for Ukraine joining NATO. No one wanted it. People were a little warmer on the idea of joining the European Union, completely soured on NATO. Two, there was a very strained relationship between President Yushchenko, who was president at the moment, and then also Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, and the cabinet, like a parliament. And third, everyone was freaked out about how Russia would reply. Again, bubbling underneath all of this, Russia says, fuck around and find out. Now, in fact, Ukraine was so split at the prospect itself of during NATO that during the NATO summit in Bucharest, thousands of protesters descended upon Ukrainian cities to denounce just the mere thought of joining NATO, just the possibility of joining NATO. So many people across Ukraine actually protested it. Again, showing the divisiveness and split in the country between supporting the West or supporting Russia. And not only that, but Ukraine does in fact have a little bit of a Nazi problem, of a fascist problem. And that is actually a holdover from World War II, which is fascinating to read about. Not only that, but it is just steeped heavily in corruption. It was at one point considered one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And what you also have to understand about Ukraine is that Ukraine, you can almost split it down the middle in terms of demographics. Eastern Ukraine has Russian speakers and Russian nationalists. Either they're from Russia, they have family from Russia, but they believe their allegiance lies with Russia. That's why you see so much support for Russia in Crimea. Then on the West, you have Ukrainian speakers. Ukrainian is its own language. You have Ukrainian nationalists, those who want to align more with the West and Europe and European Union and NATO. So what happened in Bucharest at that NATO convention, they did not offer membership immediately to Georgia and Ukraine. However, this is what is now known as the Bucharest Declaration. It says, quote, NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. Some leaders came out against it. Namely France and Germany, who, by the way, are heavily dependent on Russian natural gas. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was adamantly against Georgia's acceptance and then warned allies that Russia would basically interpret any further eastward expansion of NATO, right? Like, say, Ukraine, as a threat to Germany. And she was totally right. Russia immediately responded, I believe it was its deputy foreign minister, and said, quote, Georgia and Ukraine's membership in the alliance is a huge strategic mistake, which will have the most serious consequences for pan-European security. Putin himself came out and said, this is a direct quote, Georgia and Ukraine becoming part of NATO is a direct threat to Russia. And he made good on that threat. After Georgia and Ukraine left the table, they were disappointed, but they were given kind of like, hey, you guys should take care of X, Y, and Z and then, come back. But we do want you in NATO. Go home, fix your shit, come back. So Georgia and Ukraine left the table. They went home. And 4 months after that meeting in Bucharest, Russia invaded Georgia and took it over. Russian troops committed war crimes, like bombing civilian centers, schools, hospitals. They created torture centers. There was mass raping of both women and children. Again, I repeat, and children. They kidnapped civilians. Russia even committed a form of genocide. It displaced more than 192,000 people, and still to this day, in 2022, this took place back in 2008. As of 2022, 15,000 people are still displaced from it. Russia made the entire world aware that it was not fucking around with NATO expansion, period, full stop. Today in 2022, Georgia is still not a member of NATO, even though they tick every single box on NATO's requirement list. They provide more than 2% aid and troops. They've been over backwards to make sure that they can be accepted. Yet NATO keeps them completely and entirely in limbo as not to piss off Russia. And it's actually pretty fucked up if you think about it, of letting this country who so desperately wants protection of NATO, promising them membership, saying that you can, absolutely, sweetie, you can come in. You just have to, do A, B, C, D, P, Q, R, S, and we'll let you in. And then when that country does do all of that, plays by the rules, they don't want to piss off the schoolyard bully that has nukes. So just to recap, NATO promised eventual membership to Georgia and Ukraine in 2008. Russia made a threat. Russia made good on said threat and invaded Georgia. And eventually Russia withdrawed, beating its chest and saying, fuck around and find out, NATO. This is a preview. This brings us to the single most important event in this entire situation. If you take one thing away from this episode, let it be this. February 22nd, 2014. Now, in 2010, there was an election between Viktor Yanukovych and Yulia Tymoshenko. Eastern and Western Ukraine were split on this. Eastern Ukraine voted for Russian ally Yanukovych, and the West voted for Yulia Tymoshenko. Again, Western Ukraine wants to join NATO and the European Union. The eastern half does not, and many of them want to be incorporated into Russia even, speak Russian. Unfortunately, in this election, Russian ally Viktor Yanukovych prevailed. However, similar to how the US gets like a president of one party and an entire Congress headed by the other party, that's basically what happened in Ukraine. Ukraine's new president, Yanukovych, was one of Vladimir Putin's biggest allies and supporters. I mean, it was a puppet presidency from the word go. And that's what pissed off all of Ukraine. Ukraine even felt like this election was rigged. So much, in fact, that there was actually a runoff, but then he won the runoff. But Yanukovych was Russia's puppet. However, Parliament was more in support of the West, European Union, and NATO, again, headed by Yulia Tymoshenko. And this led to some severe problems. In 2013, the Ukrainian parliament was debating a deal of whether they should join the European Union. But Ukraine needed money badly. Through corruption and oligarchs, money was horribly spent and frequently disappeared without a trace. I mean, again, Ukraine used to be considered one of the most corrupt countries on the planet. So President Yanukovych went to an Eastern Partnership meeting in Lithuania on November 2013. He asked the European Union directly for a massive loan. The European Union came back and they were like, nah, bro, how about we give you a quarter of the amount that you're asking for, plus you need to change these laws, financial regulations, and then also take care of your corruption. Gave them a laundry list. A week later, after mulling it over, Ukraine's president refused to sign the agreement. And because of this, all hell broke loose in Ukraine. And you guys may remember it. It was all over the news. And what also didn't help is a good portion of Ukrainians felt like Yanukovych was not representing them, that he was turning his back on the European Union and the West in favor of Russia, which he was. And Ukraine got pissed off. Lots of protests happened. And then a month later, Russia came swooping in. We'll give you dollar, basically the full amount with no rules, no regulations, no stipulations. Here, have this free money. And then all hell literally broke loose in Ukraine. By January of 2014, just a couple months later, 2 protesters had been killed by police. By mid-February, thousands of protesters descended on Kyiv and all the big cities in Ukraine. There was violence, Molotov cocktails being thrown around like candy. Pro-West activists from Western and Central Ukraine came to protest Yanukovych's government. And pro-Russian activists came from the east, like, say, Crimea in the eastern part of Ukraine. There were clashes in the street from them, neighbor against neighbor. And then by mid-February, more than 20,000 protesters descended upon Kyiv, calling for Yanukovych to be removed from power entirely. And they wanted Ukraine's constitution to be restored to its earlier version, like before him. By February 21st of 2014, more than 110 Ukrainian protesters and 18 police officers had been killed. The very next day, February 22nd, Viktor Yanukovych fled Ukraine, and he fled Ukraine. Guess where he went, guys? Guess where he went? Russia. He literally just tucked tail and went to Russia. And Russia is never one to miss an opportunity. On February 27th, literally just 5 days later after Ukraine's president fled the country, Russian military units began seizing checkpoints in Crimea. And then right after, they began moving further into Crimea. Now, at this time, Russia was actually leasing a naval base in Crimea. So a lot of people think that Russia just rolled into this totally autonomous state and took it over and annexed it, but that was actually not the case. Russia troops were actually already in Crimea. And then they just like, it's showtime. That's basically what happened. And it happened very, very quickly. On March 6th, Crimean parliament voted to join Russia. March 16th, there was a referendum held in Crimea, which passed. And then March 18th, Russia officially incorporated Crimea right into it. It took less than a fucking month from Russia to it's showtime in Crimea to Russia officially incorporating Crimea. And then that's largely where it stopped. There was a lot of fighting and there have been constant battles in eastern Ukraine. Vice News has actually done a pretty incredible job continuously covering this over the last 5 years, 6 years. Even though there is a so-called, like peace agreement, they still take pot shots at each other. There is still low-level fighting every single day in Crimea. Always has been. That part has not stopped. However, it's unofficial. If you look at some of the older documentaries on Vice, I've seen all of them at this point, but there were soldiers who lived in these abandoned, bombed out ghost towns and have for the last 7 years saying, no, we know Russia's coming back. We're going to be here. We're the line of defense. But again, Russia didn't really try to further invade Ukraine at that time. It basically puffed up its chest and said, that NATO business, fuck around more and find out. We will be back and we will destroy more of you. Fuck around and find out. So let's talk about Ukraine. Everyone is curious and absolutely loves Vladimir Zelensky. How did Vladimir Zelensky get into power? Let's start with that February 22nd, 2014, when Yanukovych, again, Putin's BFF and Ukrainian hack, president at the time, fled the country to Russia. Well, in May of that year, an official election took place. And without going into details, Petro Poroshenko won the election. And he was very much anti-Russia and Ukrainian nationalist. He wanted to recoup Crimea from Russia, and he repeatedly referred to pro-Russian Crimeans as terrorists or dogs. He demanded that Russia meet with him to discuss terms on getting Crimea back, and of course, Russia just laughed in his face. In terms of his other beliefs, he believed that Ukraine should not hold any nuclear weapons. And he was actually able to flush a lot of the pro-Russia holdovers from Yanukovych's government out of parliament. He purged a lot of them. He actually spoke with both President Trump and Vice President Biden at the time, and then also signed a series of laws making Ukrainian the primary language in Ukraine. Now, guys, take into consideration how much of a melting pot Ukraine is. It has so many nationalities and people who move there, huge Jewish population as well, large population from Africa as well. It is a melting pot country. So what does that typically mean when someone makes, say, a language that's like 50-50 and then gives it, say, to the other language? Kind of brings up a sore spot. So he made Ukrainian the primary language of Ukraine, and that pissed off a lot of Russian-speaking people. Not only Russian-speaking people, but people from Hungary and Romania and other racial minorities in the country, because again, melting pot. So he pissed off a lot of people. On December 29th, 2014, Poroshenko vowed to hold a referendum on joining NATO. On September 22nd, he claimed that, quote, Russia's aggressive actions proved the need for enlargement of NATO, and that Ukrainian referendum on joining NATO would be held after every condition for the Ukrainian compliance with NATO was met. He called for country reforms, like internal reforms for the country. As I stated earlier, Ukraine is basically synonymous with corruption, and Poroshenko was absolutely no exception to this. He was corrupt as hell. The pendulum swung from Putin buddy to someone who was just rabidly a Ukrainian nationalist. So again, you're like, okay, how did Zelensky get elected? Well, in short, in 2018, Zelensky was a very well-known comedian and an actor in Ukraine, and he got involved in politics. He eventually announced his candidacy. And on April 21st of 2019, he won the election against Poroshenko. He didn't even think he was going to win. And truth be told, Vladimir Zelensky wasn't even a candidate that anyone liked. No one liked him. He didn't even have a platform. Everyone loves him now, and Westerners like us idolize him for his strengths, his one-liners, and just overall bravery and resolve against Russia. And remember when Russia was getting closer and closer to Kyiv with attacks, and the U.S. offered to take him out of Ukraine so he didn't get killed, he famously said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition, which, over here in the West, we're like, oh, real leader. But Zelensky's political career up until this invasion was lackluster at best. His major campaign promise was stopping the continued war in the East. In every move he made, he either pissed off Russia or Ukrainian nationalists. I mean, to be honest, there's a reason why legal minds typically become presidents and leaders, like in government. Zelensky really did not know what he was doing. Another huge campaign promise was to attack corruption in the country. And funnily enough, he actually put the previous president, billionaire Poroshenko, under surveillance, and then he was arrested. Poroshenko, just for shits and giggles, was actually named in the Panama Papers, accused of money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud, and did his best to basically save his cronies while he was president. Zelensky came in, and a lot of Zelensky's efforts actually did work to decrease corruption quite a bit. And just so everyone here is aware of his political beliefs, he thinks abortion should be free and available to all Ukrainians. He believes that women's health care should be a priority. He's also pro-legalization of marijuana, gambling, and sex work, and believes that all firearms should be illegal for citizens to hold. That just your everyday populace should not have access to firearms. Now, Russia has actually slowly been building up troops on Ukraine's border since Poroshenko publicly called for NATO to accept Ukraine. So in April last year, 2021, Zelensky actually made a phone call to President Biden and asked him to try to get Ukraine's membership into NATO fast-tracked. Guys, that's 1 year ago. 1 year ago. Russia was becoming more aggressive. Then there was an assassination attempt on a member of Zelensky's cabinet, which was, of course, traced back to Russia. This has been slowly building up. Then on the morning of February 24th, just 2 months ago, Putin got on state television and announced that Russia was initiating a special military operation in eastern Ukraine. Russian missiles struck a number of military targets in Ukraine, and then Zelensky declared martial law. And just 2 days later, 2 days after that, as Russia was approaching Kyiv, Zelensky made that iconic statement about needing ammunition, not a ride. His legend status just basically ignited. Polls showed that 90% of Western and Central Ukraine supported him. Even 80% of Eastern Ukraine, which is Russian speaking and Russian, people who side with Russia. And since then, he said, "We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will punish everyone who committed atrocities in this war. We will find every scum who is shelling our cities, our people, who is shooting the missiles, who is giving orders. You will not have a quiet place on this earth except for a grave." Very, very, very strong leader in all of this, which is actually kind of a miracle. That's where we are. That's kind of just a very quick primer. It's not even a complete one. If you're interested in this, it actually makes this entire thing even more fascinating. Geopolitical games are so fascinating to me. Unfortunately, this particular game ends up with a bunch of nukes being launched at one another, which, let's keep it real, guys. I mean, that's the reason NATO hasn't gone in, obviously, other than Ukraine not being a NATO country. But nuclear war is a very, very, very real prospect. Some people think Putin would do it. All of our military leadership and a lot of specialists in this are saying that, yes, he would use targeted nukes. So I don't know. It is an absolute mess. But what has been going on in Ukraine is just absolutely heinous. More than 1 million people displaced, war crimes, mass rape, mass murder, execution, torture chambers, bombing people's homes, schools, hospitals. It's absolutely unbelievable. And no one knows where it's going to end. NATO's not getting involved. Russia is further assaulting Ukraine. We have Russian soldiers who are literally quitting on the spot, being like, we didn't come here for this, because Russia lied to its own soldiers in terms of why they invaded. Russia's entire reasoning was, we are denazifying Ukraine, which is bullshit. The government of Ukraine is not a bunch of fascists. It's all bullshit. 99.9% of it is bullshit, and it's just Putin angry, not wanting the NATO expansion. There's a lot of discussion whether Putin is just trying to build up and make the Soviet Union, what it was in the strength. But it's far from that. I spoke with Iris, and I'm going to go ahead and segue into that conversation with Iris, where we just kind of throw our thoughts and opinions. I love geeking out on stuff like this. But is Putin trying to take over Ukraine? Does he have plans for invading more of Europe? Is he just trying to restore Russia to how strong the Soviet Union was, because he ain't close in terms of GDP and economy? What is his end goal? Either way, regardless of what track, at some point, it's looking like the United States and NATO will probably be getting involved at some point if it keeps on like this. Some military historians and specialists are saying that at the rate with the losses that Russia's military is undergoing, Russia's losing a lot of troops, that Russia can't sustain it, and will have no choice but to back off, especially with the oligarchs not really buying into it. They're getting screwed over too in the country right now. It's all a huge, 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 huge mess, but at the core of it, is a beautiful country with so much culture and so much good, literally being destroyed by bombs, thousands and thousands of civilians being slaughtered and killed for no reason other than Vladimir Putin and whatever his end goal is. I mean, that's literally it. And it's horrifying to watch. I followed it minute by minute. I had a command center on my laptop of I would work on my laptop, and then on my secondary monitor, I literally had live cameras all across Ukraine. I had another news thing going. I had TweetDeck up with different hashtags, and I became so emotionally overwhelmed by it all. It's devastating. When you hear of women and children being tied up and raped, when you hear of the people being bound and then executed in the back of the head in the middle of the street, of homes being bombed, people running out of water and food, people with pets. At one point, Russian troops were going around and killing everyone's pets, executing them, just opening doors and killing people's dogs, cats, and house pets. They still kill the ones on the street the strays that they find. I mean, all of this is just too heinous. And then you see the bombs being lodged and the explosions. Warfare has changed because now we have almost immediate access. Someone in Ukraine who lives in a building, you've seen the video circulating around on YouTube and whatnot, and TikTok, Facebook. Within 5 minutes, they can have shit. This just happened to me. We see live battles even from the field. It's crazy how much warfare has changed, but also how other people across the globe are able to ingest it, process it, and see it. So I'm going to go ahead and play my conversation with Iris. Iris, I'm so happy to have you back.
Oh, I'm so happy to be back.
And this is, I think, a very important episode. As I mentioned in the previous episode, my undergraduate degree is in political science. And I have been, I think, like a lot of people around the world, just absolutely obsessed with following every action and all the breaking news in Ukraine. So, and I know you too. You and I have discussed this at length multiple times.
Yeah.
So happy to have you join and come on and talk about it. And something that you know more about than I do is who the fuck is Vladimir Putin? Like I think most people think of him as just like this evil villain, especially the new generations, right? They don't know who he is. Just he's some crazy Russian president.
Right. So Vladimir Putin is basically, I mean, in a nutshell, a KGB intelligence officer for about 15 years, who also served in East Germany while East Germany was, of course, behind the wall. In 1990, he retired from KGB. And he came back to Russia because he was offered the pro-rector of Leningrad State University by one of his mentors. And he was doing well. And then in 1994, he kind of got chummy with the city's mayor and he became the deputy mayor of the city. There was no such post until he got it, which you're going to see a pattern here, okay? In 1996, that's when he moved into Moscow and he joined the presidential staff of Deputy Pavel Borodin. By 1998, Boris Yeltsin makes him the director of the Federal Security Services, which is basically the KGB in, I would have to say, sheep's clothing. By 1999, Yeltsin makes him the prime minister. And this is somebody, I mean, even the Russians were like, who is this dude? Who is he? Right? How is he like climbing the ranks so quickly? Who the fuck is this guy? That very year, December 31st of 1999, Yeltsin steps down as president and puts in Putin. And within 3 months, Putin has won a resounding electoral victory. Kind of weird, isn't it? In his first term, he basically says, I am restoring Russia to its glory. He took control over the 89 regions and republics of Russia, reduced the power of the oligarchs, basically. Within that period, he was also going after Chechen separatists. Now, I don't know if people remember that, but in Chechnya, they were they were pissed. They were like, what do you mean we belong to you guys again? Mm-hmm. And that, our governor has no power. How could you do this? These people are upset. Well, he kind of brought the hammer down on them.
Mm-hmm. Bloodily.
I mean, hard. Mm-hmm. So
Which is why if anybody who's watching the war and whatnot, there are Chechnyan fighters that have come to
mhm.
Ukraine. They're also largely Muslim, I believe, and they have
Yes, they
really
are.
long beards and, long hair and whatnot. And if you recall or follow politics, this is also the region that says they have no gay people there at all. And they had camps that they would pluck gay men and women out of their homes at night and torture them to death.
Yeah,
So,
basically.
great place.
Yeah,
No offense.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Then, of course, because of the Russian constitution, he can only serve 2 terms. So then comes in Dmitry Medvedev. He is elected president in 2008. And damn, guess who gets appointed as prime minister?
Putin.
Hmm. And to make things even better, in 2011, the two men announced that they're going to swap positions in the 2012 election. Putin wins his third presidency, and in 2014, he makes Medvedev prime minister. Do you remember what happened in 2014? Basically, Russia came in and basically said Crimea is ours because the Crimeans don't want to be part of the Ukraine.
Right.
Period. Boom.
Yep.
And Crimea, it belonged to Russia.
Yep.
This guy has had, like 2 terms in 2008. He is a president again in 2012. So in the year 2020, January, Putin decides that he's going to draft a constitutional amendment that is basically going to allow him to remain president until he decides he doesn't want to be. In July of that year, the legislature approved, and the Russian voters approved it in a national referendum, amazingly enough.
Yeah.
So, of course, one of the people like, oh, no, 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 we cannot do this. What happens to him? He gets poisoned and has to be sent to Germany to recover because that's the only place that he was going to feel safe. And that was Navalny. There's poisonings going on and everything under Putin's reign. And that's basically what it is. So, in the 2 decades that Vladimir Putin has been ruling Russia, he has consolidated his power, projected to the Russian people an image of Russia as a global power, because, really it wasn't, but that's what he's trying to show.
Yeah.
He turned Russia from a nascent democratic state into an autocratic one, has expanded Russia's influence in the Middle East, aka Syria and, chemical warfare, strengthened Russia's relations with China. They created an alignment this February and displayed a willingness to use force to achieve his goals, as in the annexation of Crimea and, of course, the large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
Yep.
And that pretty much, people in a nutshell, is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. I mean, his entire background is just so disturbing too. The KGB is not an organization that you want to.
You don't want to trifle with these guys. Oh, hell
No.
no.
No. And the poisonings too, over the last 10, 15 years, the whole spate of poisonings of any political opponents that Putin has, within Russia, even outside of Russia. Let's say that
Mhm.
there's a political opponent who writes extensively about him in Russia, usually imprisoned, tortured, whatever. They make it out, say, go to the UK. Putin will literally dispatch KGB agents to follow them and poison them.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there's Nemtsov, who was January 2016.
Yeah.
You know, suspicious circumstances that he died under. I'd have to say that when the KGB became the FSB, or the Federal Security Service, it was just, I think a lot of the people there, all of those KGB agents basically changed their badges from saying KGB to FSB. And that's it.
Yeah.
Because I think the rules were still the same.
Mm-hmm.
Between the FBI, the NSA, and the CIA and Secret Service, there is a little bit of checks and balances. You
Yeah.
know, there's infighting and this is mine, this is yours, don't touch this, don't touch that. And as an American citizen, I'd like to think that there is an oversight committee. I know
Mhm.
that's really just for show, but hey, it's there, right? For the KGB or the FSB, there is no oversight. These guys run independently and do whatever the fuck it is that they want.
Anything.
Anything. They have everybody in their pocket, and not because of a monetary gain, but it's information gain and also clout.
Yep.
Personally, this is my opinion. This is not fact. This is opinion right here. My opinion is that when Yeltsin stepped down, Putin gave him an ultimatum.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure because of the KGB and how he is, and he was an intelligence officer, he had something on Yeltsin.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I
Go
mean,
ahead,
that's
please.
why too, with like President Trump, right?
Mhm.
The infamous P tape that everybody talked about.
Right.
Whether that, exists or not,
Mhm.
that's what Putin does, is he blackmails people. He'll invite you into his home, food, sex workers, whatever. The KGB and people will follow you. They will get blackmail on you, and for a
Yeah.
lot of people, it doesn't end well.
No, it doesn't, and I think it's that we as humans, and this is, like, my sociology background speaking here. We as humans, what we like to do as a society, we like to place ourselves in a kinda like in the forefront, right? This is me, that is you. You belong over there. I'm higher up. I belong up here. We kinda, as a society, we build buffers around these people, and they think that they can do whatever it is that they want. I mean, Trump himself said it, right? He could walk down Fifth Avenue in New York, pull out a gun, shoot somebody in the head, and nobody'd say a thing.
Yep.
And I truly believe it. But, it's that sort of thing. So when somebody is, going over gaga or just giving you this and that and doing, it's like, dude, anything you want, here it is. Of course, somebody's going to take advantage of that, and there's going to be a camera somewhere
Yep.
recording every single little thing. I myself have a like a little experience of, how close knit the Communist Party or the Socialist Party is. I was in Naples, and a couple of friends and I were just walking around Naples. We were just walking the streets, going up and down. We were a little drunk, as sailors do, and we came across this little square, this little area in some back alley because we were looking for, I think it was a little church that we were trying to find. I could read, and it said, National Socialist Party. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And in my little dumb head, I was like, let's walk into the building and see what else we can find. So we walked in, and immediately 3 guys were standing there, like barring us from going any farther. And in American or in English, she says, "What are you doing here?" I answered back in Italian and said, "Hey, just curious. We're looking around." And he's still talking to me in English, and very good English, by the way. "You need to leave now." We're like, "Okay, whatever, man. It's 3 girls, 3 guys. What the hell are we gonna do? We need to leave." These guys followed us for about a mile because we were quite
Oh
away.
my god.
And until we got into a taxi, because it was starting to freak us out, we didn't see them again. But they followed us that whole time, and it was creepy. Let me tell you, I have never been so I was scared because, we were in this little podunk little neighborhood way in there, away from, the main courts and the main streets and everything. And I was desperately trying to get us back to a main street where we weren't going to be all of a sudden, this blind corner and these guys were going to be there. It was scary.
That's how you know that whatever country. So I lived outside of Paris for a bit,
Mhm.
French major and studied abroad and whatnot. And so I lived outside of Paris. And one of my trips to Paris, I went to a coffee shop, like a little cafe, and you know that they don't like you when they speak to you in English. Even if you're speaking to them in their native language,
Exactly.
like
Exactly.
you're like, oh shit, this is not a good interaction.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I'll be leaving now. Thank you. Bye.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah.
If everyone remembers the Sochi Olympics,
Right.
a lot of the athletes found cameras in their rooms. Everything was being monitored by Russia, again, probably for blackmail purposes, right? Got to
Oh
have
yeah.
that Rolodex. Russian KGB agents and doctors from the Secret Service impersonated lab engineers and then forced their way into different drug testing areas of the Olympics and
Mhm.
basically forced them to deem Russian athletes test clean when they were all drugged, all on drugs, like all performance.
Exactly.
So it's just it's corrupt from the top to the very, very bottom.
Yeah, and again, it's because Putin wants to give not just his peeps, there in Russia, but the world, we are the USSR again, and we are to be feared. And that's basically what he wants to do. He wants that back.
Is that and so this is something that people are debating constantly right now is why is Putin doing this? Ukraine, Crimea, all of those areas, Chechnya, like all of that used to be part of the Soviet Union. All of it. The Soviet
Mhm.
Union was huge. It was a superpower. 100% was a superpower. Russia modern day is not.
No.
And we've seen evidence of that in this war, right? Like all of their military equipment so far has been pretty antiquated. Like unless they've just used their old shit that they had left over to get it out of the way or, take the losses early on, Russia doesn't really have as big of a modernized military as they claim to have had. And that's actually proving to be kind of true.
Right, it is pretty coming. I mean, you could see it in the tanks that they are
Yeah.
using.
You almost wanna play the chicken dance when you see videos of them, like, marching their tanks down the street, like, doodle 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 doo, you know?
I mean, it's so true. I mean, um, so basically, okay, I'm going to totally nerd out on you right now. So the T-14 is, what they're calling the next generation battle tank for these guys. But if you really think about it, a lot of these tanks are the tanks that were being used during the Cold War, which is the T-72. Now, the T-72 is an antiquated type of, it's kind of like, let's say we were comparing our Bradley to a Sherman tank. It's just no. The armor is there's no comparison within armor or anything. Here you can see that I think a lot of this stuff is Yeltsin pretty much mothballed a lot of the military equipment because first of all they couldn't sustain it. Second, what was he going to use it for? Right? He went from being a dictatorship that held all these countries that he really couldn't hold anyway to a country that's like, here we are. Just give me a vodka, I'll be happy. That was Yeltsin, right? He was basically a drunkard. Now that they need to bring all this stuff out of a mothball, they're starting to see that, oh shit, we need to develop something because this is not working. And I think that is where he again is trying to put that like what I said about, Wizard of Oz. The big old big head that looks nasty and mean is
Yeah.
starts saying, "Don't pay attention to the little man behind the screen." Because that's basically who he is. He's the little man behind the screen. Yeah, I it's sad to see what you were saying to me. Russia is kind of like that kid that hangs around with the cool kids in high school,
Yeah.
and they push him around and kick him around, but he's still there because he's hanging out with the cool kids.
Guys, this is a fact. As it stands as of today, Russia's economy, like its GDP, gross domestic product, right, is 22nd in the world. The size barely bigger than the state of Ohio.
Mhm. And that's sad. I mean, to see, and I can understand why he and the Russian people want to basically, thump their chest and go, "Hey," it's kinda like Joe Foreman trying to go in and go a couple of rounds with Muhammad Ali, right?
Yeah.
It's like, "Yeah, I was the greatest," and Muhammad Ali is just like, "Old man, sit down." And that's basically what this is right now.
Yeah.
Russia's just is beating his chest and saying, "I matter." The way things are going right now, economically, it's kinda scary, but they could pull it off.
Taking Ukraine?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it right here on this episode. I do believe that Russia will actually end up taking the whole of Ukraine. I actually do anticipate that to happen. Because like, GDP and economy and things like that, that KPI more or less doesn't account for things like healthcare, right? Like in the nation,
Mm-mm.
education, food, things like that. Internally, Russia is falling the fuck apart. I mean, it's people, they've already noticed food shortages. And
Yep.
of course, the state television, which by the way, the government owns TV stations more or less there and news organizations. So they're
Mm.
only being fed propaganda 24/7 to begin with. He has not yet, however, shut down the internet like China has. So at least they do have, the ability to see some facts. Yeah, shit's grim over there right now. It's really, really grim.
It really is, and I think Putin has basically taken a page out of a playbook that was played here in the United States, and is doing exactly what was happening here. The way to feed a lie to someone is you sandwich it between two truths, right? People will eat that up, and they will forget about the lie in the middle because you've got two truths right around it. So if you give half truths and misinformation, people will believe you. And that's exactly what's going on in Russia. I don't know if you've been able. Of course. Okay. TikTok is not an authority, people, but you can see how society reacts to something. And
Mhm.
Vice, I love following Vice
God, me
on
too.
TikTok. They were showing interviews of people, and the Russian public literally believes that Russia was there to give humanitarian aid and that Ukraine is the aggressor.
Yep.
They literally and totally believe this fact.
They do. They absolutely do, which is just mind-boggling to me that so many people. And what was heartbreaking is when I was following the war in the early days, like within 2 weeks, say, of it starting, so many Russian soldiers were getting there thinking they were going to be heroes and that the
Mhm.
Ukrainian people were going to be ecstatic to see them, like imagery of like World War II, right? When like
Yeah.
France was liberated from the Nazis and stuff and concentration camps, lining the streets, welcoming them. That's not at all what happened. And then when they were shot at and, attacked, Russian soldiers were like, "What the fuck? Like, we're supposed to be your savior, from the Nazis, from your
Exactly.
autocracy that you guys are going through." And like seeing the text messages and hearing the voicemails from Russian soldiers back home to their families of like, "I don't know why we're here. We've been lied to."
Mhm. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Especially the
It
ones who
really.
died for it.
Mhm. Right, and it's, and it's not the first time Russia goes through something like this. When Russia invaded Afghanistan, Afghanistan basically was Russia's Vietnam, and I believe that this is going to be another of that instance. I mean, when you have a grandma coming up to you and it's like, "Here, put these sunflowers in your pocket, so when you die, we're gonna have sunflowers come up," you know, I mean, how do you fight that?
Yeah.
Plus, you don't know who's an enemy, who's not. The guerrilla warfare that's going on right now, the world is on the Ukraine side.
Mhm.
It's got to be extremely demoralizing. So, therefore, when people start saying, "Oh, well, what about what they've found, these mass graves and the raping and all this, they're animals." Well, when you have a military force that has been lied to and is frustrated and they're not getting the equipment they're supposed to have and they're demoralized and everything, they're going to act out.
Yep.
And I know that Putin knows this, so therefore he doesn't even have to push them.
Not only that, but the commander, his name is the Butcher. That's what he's known as, the Butcher, and he was in Syria, and
Right.
he was responsible for promoting and encouraging heinous war crimes, like mass rape, mass torture, mass things like that. Well, Putin just switched him and sent him to Ukraine, like, a couple weeks ago, and
Exactly.
put him in control of it, and it's all psychological warfare. One thing that we have to keep in mind is I feel like a lot of especially Americans and Westerners, like, we have a very Western democratic view of
Mhm.
everything, you know what I mean?
Yes.
We have freedoms that a lot of other places don't have, especially Russia. So when we're viewing this, we're like, Putin man bad, you know?
Yeah.
Warfare bad. But you guys have to remember, half the reason we're in this shit show to begin with is because driven by the United States forcing NATO expansion, Putin has quite literally been since like early 90s, fuck around and find out with NATO. Just
Oh,
fuck
yeah.
around and find out. You keep doing this and expanding this, I will fuck your shit up. We're gonna have nuclear war. He's been saying this for 20 plus years. And
He
America's
has.
like tiptoeing through the, tulips, like, we're gonna bring everyone into NATO. Ukraine, let's go. Hold hands. And the thing about it too is like all these atrocities, guys, the United States has also committed them too. Vietnam,
Mhm.
all over, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've done the same thing. It's what happens in warfare, unfortunately.
Yeah, as a Western democratic republic and Western ideals and views and morals and values, we expect kind of like a gentlemanly war. And that just doesn't fucking happen.
It's oxymoronic, the entire
It's
concept.
oxymoronic. Exactly. Exactly. But then if you think about it, Robin, what have we been taught in school? We're the good guy,
Yeah, exactly.
right? We are always the good guy. The winner basically writes history.
Yep.
And it's just the way it is. But not just within ourselves, but I have to say in any kind of Anglican history, if you look at Napoleon, the Napoleonic War, or any conflict that has happened in Europe, it's always shown in such a romanticized fashion.
Mhm.
It's like you have a rank of guys here and a rank of guys there, and they shoot at each other point blank. They break for tea at 4 o'clock, and
Right.
then everybody has dinner and doesn't come out to the battlefield until the sun is up,
Mhm.
right? And we fought, according to the history books, we fought our Revolutionary War like that. We fought the War of 1812 like that, and we fought,
Yeah, some battles of the Civil War, yeah, were
yeah,
like that.
were fought
They
like
would
that,
they would
right?
literally put up flags for break.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, "Hello, we're taking a break now. Time for tea," or something like that. We don't see the nastiness of war, and we've never seen it until it flashed us in our faces during the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
That is when we started to see the reality of war.
Yep.
And of course, and that's when so many movements like, make love, not war. Because finally, as a society, we saw that war was not this romanticized thing of, I'll see you when you get back, and soldiers singing, I'll be home for Christmas, and all this other bullshit that we have been fed for so long.
We didn't like it very much at all after you post Vietnam when soldiers came back maimed,
Hmm.
traumatized, PTSD, limbs missing, addicted to opium and drugs and things like that. We shunned them as a society. We didn't reach out to be like, "Oh, well, we forced these young men into this position." We literally shit on them as a society.
Well, and why? We hate a loser. We hate a loser. And that's basically it.
It's disgusting. And, other countries, especially, Europe and whatnot, I mean, guys, they lived through World War II. When you go, and I know a lot of our listeners have traveled extensively, but like when you go to France, especially, right? Like, and see Normandy Beach and learn the history of it and, things that happened all across Europe and Poland and Germany, concentration camps and stuff like that. That, that trauma, that generational trauma is still there. Like it's
Mm.
still there, alive and well. That's not something that we've really had to deal with on a grand scale of say like Canada invading us and killing us and and monuments. I mean, we haven't had to deal with anything like that before. Like we're blessed as a country, really. I hate that word so much, but like we are blessed and pretty lucky as a country.
We are. And the first time that something like that happened to us, was 9/11.
Yeah, and imagine the North versus the South bullshit that you still see in this country. Like, I'm from the South. I can speak to this before anybody gets their panties in a twist. The South will rise again. The damn Northerners, blah blah blah. I hear it every fucking day. That was 60s. These wars in Europe, World War II just happened ended like 1945. Not that long ago, guys. So if this civil war is that fucking raw here in the United States, imagine how all of Europe feels. Ukrainian
Right.
annexation. And let's not even get into the Bosnian War and how fucked up that was.
Oh, I know. That was complete genocide.
Complete nutter.
Yeah. And I think and that's why I think, this raw wound, because it is still very, very raw trauma for all of these NATO countries. First of all, that's why they created NATO, because we're like, this is not happening again."
Mhm.
2, and that's why everybody wants like, "Hey, come join us," because we want to create as much of a buffer zone between NATO and Russia.
Yep.
Now, Russia went from being the complete bad guy, Cold War, to the drunk uncle that, just doesn't know how to shut his mouth up when during parties.
Mhm. Now that's Kim Jong Un.
Right? Just like, "Stop touching me." Um, but now This drunk uncle is starting to sober up,
Yeah.
and that's what's starting to scare NATO. And they have every right to.
And it's scaring NATO to the point where I'm not sure if you guys have heard the news this week. Well, I mean, it's not even new news. This has been going on since the 90s. France and Germany have not been excited or approving of Ukraine joining NATO for like 15 years. The reason being is that let's take Germany, for example. Germany is in a very awkward position. You know what I mean? Especially with Ukraine.
Very.
First of all, Germany gets most of its natural gas from Russia. Russia is smart. Putin is a strategist. And a lot of Europe takes Russian natural gas. And so not only does Germany not want to, screw itself on natural gas, if you recall, Germany occupied Ukraine during World War II.
You did.
And if you guys have heard on the news or Vice, or whatever, Ukraine does in fact have a lot of Nazis, guys. It does in fact have a lot of Nazis. It has a lot of far right wing socialist people. They actually have their own military unit for their ideals. So like that is actually fact. That's left over from World War II. Jews and whatnot were sent to concentration camps from Ukraine. So Ukraine itself has this sordid history, and Germany's like, this is kind of uncomfortable. For us,
Mhm.
I don't think that we're really gonna wanna send weapons to.
Basically nurtured to become neo-Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. So that plus natural gas, they're like, I think not." France, basically the same thing.
Yeah, because France was what? Again, occupied by Germany. And,
You brought up Poland, Iris, too.
yeah. Okay, so and here's the thing about Poland, right? So Poland, they were part all of this what was called the Iron Curtain, because you had the Iron Curtain and then you had NATO. Then Russia decides, or the USSR decides, it's too expensive to keep all these people in, under one roof. So you kids are grown up, kick you out of the house.
Right?
So of course NATO goes, oh, 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 come play with us, come play with us, come join our family. So Poland and the Czech Republic and all these other little countries, Romania, they all became part of the NATO, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And Russia's like, whoa, I have Belarus, Moldova, and the Ukraine between me and NATO.
mhm.
So that's when Putin's like, fuck around and find out.
Yep. If you guys look at a map and look at a map of NATO expansion, NATO has been slowly creeping up on Putin's
Hmm.
doorstep. Autocracy, they don't want that. They don't find value in democratic ideals. They want to hold on to power, have the oligarchs and all of that shit do as they see fit. It's not going to work out. So the United States has been like going to these NATO conventions or NATO conferences and being like, yes, 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 yes. Come on, Ukraine. We want a military base in Ukraine. We want to be right up in their Kool-Aid to
Exactly.
monitor, get intelligence and things like that. That's what the West wants. And Russia considers it a threat.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, here you have they're flanked completely. You've got Finland at the north. You've got Turkey down south. If the United States really wanted to, they could park a carrier out in the Indian Ocean, and there's the threat to the south. We could landlock Russia. The only thing that Russia has going for it, and Napoleon and Hitler both found out, in the words of famous comedian Eddie Izzard, you invade Russia in the winter and you find out it's a bit cold, it's a bit cold, it's a bit cold.
Yes.
You just can't do it. Now, again, Putin being a strategist, when does he go down south? In February,
Yep.
right? Not during the winter, but as spring is coming.
Mhm.
So he knows that those awful Russian winters are not going to be something that's going to stop him.
Mhm.
So therefore, I think this guy, like you said, is quite the strategist. He knows exactly what he's doing, and I think it's starting to affect other nations. And they're starting to go, "What the fuck?"
Finland and Sweden are not part of NATO. And over the last 2 weeks, there's been a lot of discussion about they border, by the way, they border Russia.
Mhm. They border Russia.
Um, and they're like, "Oh shit, maybe we should get in on this NATO action." And of course, France and Germany are less than enthused about it. The United States is like, "Yes, yes, yes." And so they're trying to think about fast tracking them. What's also interesting to note is that a lot of more progressive, open, I want to say open-minded people, but a lot of Russians are against this war. Like they are. I wouldn't say the
Mhm.
majority, but a lot of them are. And they are actually fleeing to Finland and Sweden, getting out of Russia and going there, which I find interesting. But Putin's already threatened nuclear war and threatened to invade both Sweden and Finland now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you really think about it, if I was him, I would, because you're just a little too close.
And do you remember the day the news broke that Finland came out and said, yes, we are going to pursue NATO applications? Literally the next fucking day, it was seen, intelligence picked up Putin was moving arms towards the border with, Finland
Mhm.
the day
Mm,
after.
yep, the day after. So this guy, he's not a talker. He's a doer.
Hmm.
And that's what makes him, I don't want to say scary, but dangerous.
And what's so interesting is that the whole world has fallen in love with Zelensky. Zelensky, bless his little heart, guys, he was an actor. I mean, he was kind of like a Ronald Reagan, right? In the sense
Yeah,
of he had no political experience whatsoever. He played a president in a TV show. That was the extent of his political experience. When
right.
he ran on a social media blitz, funny ads and things like that. He was a comedian. He was a stand-up comedian. And so he had funny ads. I mean, it was like Trump and Ronald Reagan part 2, you know?
Yep.
He didn't even really have a platform. He was a little bit more democratic with his ideals, you know. But yeah, he was probably the worst person that they had for the job, to deal with corruption and stuff like that. And he has risen to the occasion, absolutely. You know, can you imagine as an American, Iris? Like, can you imagine like Biden, you know, someone attacking us and it looking like we're our entire country is about to fall, and then Joe Biden sitting in the White House, like, well, I'm here to fight and putting on camo.
Right, right. That's kind of like, no, that's not how it works.
Obama, Trump, Clinton, any of them. No, they wouldn't do that.
No, I could see George W. though.
I can
He would
kinda
probably strap on like a 45 or a 357 or an eagle there and put on his shit kickers and a cowboy hat and go, let's rock.
probably. Uh,
You know, well, all we have to do is threaten somebody with Cheney and a shotgun, and give Cheney a shotgun, and he's ready to go. Oh wow, man, that's so long ago.
I got it. I know, thanks, I feel old now. How old were you guys? Let us know. How old were you guys when Cheney shot someone in the face? Oh god.
Woo, it's a long time ago. But yeah, okay. We digress. So now here's a question for you. Do you think that it will get to somebody pushing the red button?
Let's put it this way. I have decided to start a garden and get my own local food supply. I guys, I need some massive help. If any of you guys like are really good at farming or gardening, I'm
Get
really
chickens?
late. I'm really fucking late to the party here this year of getting a garden out, and I need some advice. However, I think about that all like every day, multiple times a day, Iris. I simply do not know. I do believe that Putin is going to take over Ukraine. I do
Mhm,
believe that Putin is going to probably go for Finland and Sweden. He's going to make sure that he's not landlocked and try to take as
right.
much ground as he can get. They're non-NATO countries. Remember, the entire reason why we haven't gone boots on the ground and no other countries have gone boots on the ground is because the second someone does, the red button could be in play. I mean, it could be in play now, but like especially so. You know what I mean? When NATO gets
Mhm,
involved. If he invades Poland, for example, all of NATO has to engage.
exactly.
So I mean, really, in your opinion, Iris, do you think Putin is that unstable?
It's not that he's unstable, I think that
Unpredictable rather.
let's say he uses a tactical nuke. Now, using a tactical nuke wouldn't be like, those ICBMs that we Gen Xers feared were going to fall from the sky, and we used to, like, throw ourselves under the desk and cover our heads because, those were our drills on Thursdays.
Like the Fallout
Yeah.
game series,
Hmm.
Mushroom Clouds.
Exactly. Not something like that. A tactical nuke would be more, directed at a city, and it wouldn't be such a conflagration of radiation, let's say. I see him probably using something like that I know that this guy is also a strategist and he knows that right now he's somewhat the bad guy, but as soon as he uses nukes, whether it's tactical or ICBM, he becomes enemy number one and the world will turn against him and then he will have a world war. Now, if he tries to go after Finland and Sweden, you have to remember that these guys are European Union members. Will the European Union rise to the occasion and try to protect its states?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I think, see, I would, well, I'm not saying I think, I would hope that they do, but you're probably right.
I hate to say this, but they need the United States.
But yeah,
And I think that if the EU comes out to support, I don't think that the United States would back them up. I think the United States is going to be a drastic action will have to take place. I think NATO will have to be involved before the United States will enter this.
yeah, I think you're probably right, and I think the only reason the US would get involved is if one, either he used those hypersonic weapons and delivered a tactical nuke somewhere.
Well, guys, and don't forget too that it has already been said that Putin has used chemical weapons in Ukraine multiple
Oh,
times
yeah,
already.
exactly.
That should have been enough to get NATO involved. Like, period.
Yeah.
The news came out and then it was just swept right under the rug.
Well, okay, so chemical weapons. There's a variety of chemical weapons, right? Now, these were delivered by drone, supposedly. This it's alleged, right, that these were delivered by drone, but I think it was just CS gas, and he may be just testing the waters. Now, CS gas is basically tear gas, okay? Because from what I was reading from reliable sources, not just routers or anything, but other reliable sources, it made people, it irritated their eyes, nose, and throat. But it was not
It didn't gas them to death.
right. It didn't gas them to death.
Like
So
what we saw in Syria.
exactly that. Oh fuck!
If
That
you
was
guys
horrible.
want to see something terrible, it's all over TikTok, YouTube of when Syria was gassed and what happened to the people when chemical weapons went into play.
That was awful. I think what he might just be testing the waters and see if he can deploy chemical weapons by drone.
I think it's going to take him attacking a NATO country for anyone to really get involved. And it's so incredibly sad. It's so incredibly sad, I think, because every fiber of my being is screaming, "Help Ukraine, help Ukraine." They're shooting everybody's pets that were left behind.
Fuckers.
Yeah, they're torturing. They bombed an animal shelter for the fun of it. And then you see on Chinese social media them laughing at pictures of ripped apart and dead pets and dead dogs. They are waging this just campaign of sheer brutality and no one's actually helping them beyond, obviously sending equipment, bullets, warplanes, things like that. But like they
Mhm.
really need some help there.
They really do. But then again, NATO just falls back on Article 5, Article 5.
Yep.
You have to be a member. We can't do anything unless you're a member. It's kind of like, the stupid rule of getting a damn, what is that? When you can't see somebody, restraining order, right? But, well, we can't help you until he hurts you. Well, how are you going to help somebody once they're dead? And that's when you can go arrest the guy. I mean, it's ridiculous. And this is what's going on right now. Ukraine is that abused person.
Yeah.
Russia is the abuser. And NATO is the cop who's saying, well, he hasn't really hurt you yet, so we can't arrest him.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, really. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you that until something drastic happens, and it's probably going to be either chemical warfare or some sort of radioactive use, NATO's not going to do a damn thing.
Now, from what you know, Iris, I mean, you were in the military for years,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you still have a lot of contacts in the military and friends in the
Yeah.
military. From what you know, let's say that Putin, has a nuclear submarine, comes somewhat off the coast, and launches it at, say, New York City. Do
Okay.
we have any sort of protections in place, defensive systems that would spare it? Or is it still kind of like 1950s hide under your desk? As if that's going to do a fucking thing.
I know, right? It's like, why am I hiding under my desk? Me personally, if I know that there's a nuke coming, I'm going to go towards it because I don't want to stick around.
Become a ghoul.
Yeah, I don't want to become a ghoul.
You don't want to live in Good Neighbor.
No, I don't. Oh god. So, okay, to your question. If it parked itself outside of New York City, kind of like that beautiful movie Red Hunt for Red October, right? He was going to park himself right outside of New York City and he was going to listen to that American rock and roll. If a submarine got that close, then our submarines did not do their job. Granted, anything that a ballistic submarine would have, it doesn't have to be parked that close. If they did launch against the United States, there is no recourse. The only recourse is to launch against Russia.
So New York City or whatever city they launched on would essentially be dead, and we would just have to relaunch back, and then it would be a ping pong game of nukes.
Yeah, it's basically a ping pong game. Yeah.
And just so we're clear on the numbers, guys, the United States, and we're talking, this is as far as total number of weapons overall, between retired and available, right? Like our whole arsenal of weapons, the United States has a total of 5,550 total nuclear weapons.
That we know of.
5,550 that we know of, exactly. 2,300 of those are apparently available. Russia supposedly has 6,257 nukes. The thing about it is that since Putin has come to power, like early on, he has taken all funding from the public sphere and put it into the military, which
Yeah.
that has to be nukes because it sure as shit wasn't on tanks or fighter jets or anything else really.
Yeah.
So Russia has a Moab and a whole bunch. They just a month or two ago, Iris, like show off their brand new nuke.
Yeah, it was a hypersonic nuke. So basically it's super fast is basically what he's saying.
Well, I guess we'll die faster.
Well, and see, and here's the thing though. So I grew up in a world where it was ICBM missiles, and it was the Titans and the Soyuz, right? So these were missiles that they were called intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and they had MIRVs, which is a multiple reentry vehicle. And basically, what that meant was that one missile held several nuclear heads. Okay, that's what I'll call them. It would go up into the air, into outer space, go across the sphere, come back, do a re-entry, and then it would pop its lid, and all of these nukes would fall area effect. Boom. And that's what we have. Then, as I was in the military, we started with ways to deliver weapons tactically, right? We have smart bombs, we have tomahawks, we have other assorted things that I cannot talk about that could basically put a nuke at your doorstep. And now we have these hypersonic weapons that don't have to leave the atmosphere and re-enter. We can send them straight to where it needs to go and done. So war has changed drastically from my generation to your generation to the generation of my grandkids. So will this war give us the type of fallout scenario? I don't think so. I think it's going to be more of the COD type of scenario where it's tactical aggression at certain areas and places to demoralize and bring down the public so it'll surrender. So basically, what I think he wants to do is he wants to demoralize the governments of certain areas, like let's say the Ukraine. I mean, Belarus is already his puppet,
Yep.
as is Moldova and Crimea. But I think he wants to put enough fear and demoralization in areas where they're just going to go belly up.
Yeah. I do fear that Poland is actually going to be next. Like, I feel like Poland is kind of in step on the list for him, maybe the last step. It came out today. I think Iris let me know. I haven't been watching the news today. Russia actually cut off natural gas to Bulgaria and Poland today. Now, Poland is a NATO country, and
Yep.
they have quite the history. Poland has been integral and very, very, very important in basically every world war. It has a lot of grain, a lot of resources. It's basically flat, right?
And it's the stepping stone.
Exactly. It's a stepping stone. It's how Germany got around, Russia got around. Poland is just that country that everybody has to traverse through. It's that stepping stone. Poland was invaded by Hitler and then Stalin, and they actually split Poland between the two of them, between Nazi
Mhm.
Germany and then, USSR, or Soviet Union. The Soviet Union actually killed almost 25,000 Polish soldiers in World War II in the forest of like Western Russia, basically, when they incorporated that piece of Poland. Then the Nazis killed like 300,000 people in Poland. Poland was by far like the worst off country, I would say. Would you agree, Iris? Like with
No,
World
I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, next to Germany, I think Poland was the one that, lost the most peeps.
Yeah, Poland, absolutely horrible. After World War II, the Soviet Union kept it on as a satellite state, more or less. Like Poland was completely subservient. It was a puppet to Moscow.
Mhm.
Um, Early 1990s, Russian troops left Poland, and it's been pretty independent ever since then. Now, after Putin got in power, Belarus, whom, if you guys been watching the news, again, puppet to Putin, 100%. Russia does a lot of military exercises in Belarus, as they did here before they invaded Ukraine, right? It was kind of a sign. Well, like
Mhm.
back in 2009, Putin was holding military exercises in Belarus where they were pretending to nuke Poland. That was the exercise. They were pretending to actually nuke Poland. And Poland government came out to NATO and they're like, "What the fuck, y'all? Like, why is he doing this? Why is Putin on our borders pretending to nuke us?" Um, yeah. And then also don't forget that the Polish plane in 2010 went down, and it's kind of unknown. It went down in Russia, and it killed everybody on board, and it sounds like Russia may have actually taken it down.
I think they did it, to tell you the truth. That was a really, really fucked up. I remember watching the news and just
Yeah, the Polish president was on that plane, y'all.
yeah. So there's no fucks given. None. And I think that's what makes him so fucking dangerous because he gives no fucks.
None. Do you think, Iris, that him turning off the gas in Poland is kind of like a sign of things to come?
I think it is because let's look at this. Like, okay, kind of like wheat, okay? So between the Ukraine and Russia, 33% of the world's wheat is created there.
Mhm.
Is grown there, I should say, not created, but grown. Granted, Russia only creates 3% of the world's petroleum, but natural gas is key for them.
Mhm.
All of Europe relies on Russia, Ukraine. So if Ukraine can't send anything out and Russia goes, fuck you, I'm turning shit off, I could see that as, next step. Here comes Russia knocking on Poland's door, right? I don't know if there has been any, I haven't seen any talk about intelligence and satellite imagery, but the Russians have MLRs, which is basically a missile. It's a rocket launcher truck. Is basically what it is, and that's how they were playing, pretending that they were nuking. They're nuking Russia with these vehicles like this, and I know they still have them. And if they really wanted to break shit down, they would just have to park a whole bunch of those there and just, you know, do what we did to Iraq. Just bomb the fuck out of it.
Yeah. It's it's going to be really interesting to see how things move. I mean, if you recall, the build up to this is Russia just started amassing troops on the border with Ukraine,
Mhm.
amassing them, and then they hid under, "Oh, we're just doing a military exercise." Well, why are more coming? Well, Putin said exercise is over, they're going home. More were still coming, you know? Like
Right.
they weren't going home. So to me, the satellite imagery is the biggest piece of this. When we saw via satellite imagery that Putin was moving stuff towards the border with Finland, I was like, "Oh man, that's something to watch right now."
Mhm.
But if he starts amassing troops near Poland, that's gonna make me nervous.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna make NATO nervous, and that is as soon as the first Soviet steps onto Poland, that's when NATO will react, and that's when basically World War III is gonna start. Even though, like you were telling me, earlier, he already believes that World War III has started.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's when it'll start, and it's gonna get hairy. It's gonna get really, really hairy.
I wonder too if that's why Russia is taking over Ukraine or like plans to try to take it all so that they'll be right there with Poland, which will then be the entry point to Germany immediately.
Yeah, and of course, he doesn't want his any of himself exposed. I mean, he's got Finland to the north and Ukraine, and he needs to cover up those flanks. And if I was playing Risk, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
I would take Ukraine and Belarus and just mass produce, like little guys there.
I mean, if you look at a map of Eastern Europe, Belarus and Ukraine, if he gets Ukraine and Belarus, he can then go right and cuts off gas to Bulgaria, which that's really odd strategically since Bulgaria is so far south. But it would open up, like he's basically trying to hit those weak states, and then that would send
Mhm.
him right into Serbia, which he has allies in Serbia.
Right. And then now if he takes Ukraine, he has all of the Black Sea,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
So that's a jumping point off into Turkey. Turkey right now has a weird little relationship. I think for them, Turkey would be the kind of like the stepping stone into the Middle East. He's already got Syria, so then he could kind of like do a squeeze play there. I hate to say it, but because Caesar was an extremely military strategist, but it seems like so is this guy, and it's kind of like he's using some of those tactics.
He's a horrible, horrible human being, but, like, say what you will about him, but he, above all, is a strategist. I think it's a disservice to the American public or Western public when people are just like, "Oh, he's insane. He's like Kim Jong-un. He's insane." No, he's really actually not. I mean, he could be. The reason why he's doing this, Russia's economy is shit. They have
Mhm.
nothing. He obviously wants to restore, Russia to the Soviet Union level of superpower,
Right.
but look at all these countries. Ukraine, huge wheat producer. Poland, same thing. He has the opportunity, if he invades, to gather all of these resources and then also get the United States via NATO out of his backyard.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, he is what's he falling back to? How did he grow up? He grew up in the Cold War.
Yep.
It was two players. It was United States slash NATO and the USSR,
Yep.
and that was it. And I think that's what he's trying to achieve again.
Now we have the wild card of China, though.
Oh, China, yeah. China, I think, is gonna be, the person that sits back and watches two fighters beat the shit out of each other and then take both of them out because they're just so, just so fucked already.
I feel like China has been busy on the African continent with mines and development and stuff like that. Like China has been making big money moves.
Mhm.
Giving out loans and, I mean, taxing exports and imports. Like, China has been focusing really, really, really hard strategically as well during this time. And I feel like their relationship with Russia has gotten much closer over the last
Right.
year. And that's that's actually what is like terrifying?
Yeah, and and it's more of kind of like it's not an allegiance because the only ally China has is North Korea. It's more of kind of like an alignment, and I was talking to my dad about this, and he goes, "Well, what's the difference between an alignment and an allegiance?" Well, in an allegiance, you basically have promised yourself you and that person are one. You're
Mhm.
kind of like a married couple, right? Somebody goes after your wife, hopefully you will protect your wife. In an alignment, it's more of like, okay, so we see eye to eye and we agree on a few things. So you do you, I will do me, and as long as we don't step on each other's toes, we're cool. And that's basically what China's doing right now.
I can see that. I can see that China wouldn't want to screw up any of its own, monetary investments.
No, because sanctions against China is the last thing that it wants to do right now.
Yeah.
Right? And I believe that what China is going to do is that there's going to be a power vacuum. When all this is said and done, there's going to be a power vacuum, whether it's going to be us or whether it's going to be China. And by us, I mean NATO. China's going to move into that power vacuum. And that's what it expects to do. And I think China is kind of hedging its bets with NATO.
Honestly, same. I mean, if you just look at public sentiment, the entire world is on Ukraine's side right now.
Exactly.
It's kind of like if you see a puppy being kicked in the street, Do you support the person kicking the puppy, or do you support the puppy and come to the puppy's aid? Ukraine is that puppy
Exactly.
right now. So I think
Mhm.
that China is, yeah.
What's the power vacuum, that Russia is going to leave because I think China is hoping that Russia is going to step on its own toes and trip, and then China will move into that slot, and Russia will be done.
China's only out for itself.
It is.
Period. So that makes a lot of sense. Or it'll rush in and make Russia paid a lot of money, loan and whatnot, and make Russia paid a lot of money to come out of purgatory,
Mhm.
more or less, and own
Exactly.
them.
Exactly.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up to you too, Iris, is how do you foresee this conflict like impacting us? Because I don't know about all of you listeners, but I'm noticing it at the grocery store. Interestingly enough, one of my good friends is actually in Germany. She's in Berlin, and like 3 weeks into the conflict, she was posting pictures of the grocery store, and they were already out of everything.
Oh,
Um,
fuck.
like one tomato was like $7.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So that was really interesting to see, and it was a big deal when vegetable and produce trucks would arrive. People would swarm the grocery stores and stuff. Germany's already seeing it currently. And here, variety of factors, right? But like definitely this crisis is not helping.
No, it's not helping, and kinda like how I was saying about, the wheat production, there are countries that completely and totally rely on Russia and
Yep.
Ukraine for its wheat trade. You have countries like Somalia, 100% of its wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia,
And guys, imagine Somalia not getting aid and food. I mean,
right?
um,
And there could be some crass people, I'm like, "Well, aren't they used to that?" Fuck you, first of all.
mhm,
And two, I mean, yeah, sure, but you still world starvation. Once a third world country starts starving, it's a trickle down effect, or actually trickle up, I should say. Africa, Egypt, Sudan, Senegal, all of these places are going to start to feel this impact of wheat prices. They're not going to be able to afford any wheat. Therefore, we are going to have to start taking care of how we are using our wheat. And
yeah.
I can already see it in bread prices. I mean, our local Kroger, usually we can get a loaf of bread for $1.99. Oh, we're at $3 right now for a loaf of bread.
I'm gonna have to bring in the reins because I'm paying like almost $5 for a loaf of bread.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
But this is store brand, man, and store brand
Oh
shouldn't
man.
you don't expect store brand to be $3. There are so many things that are not on the shelf, and it's kinda starting to get a little scary. When I was a kid in the '70s, I remember seeing stores with empty shelves, but, I was a child of, 3, 4, 5 at the time, so to me, it wasn't impactful because I mean, I always had what I needed, right?
Yeah.
My parents did what they could. But now that I am in their position, it's fucking scary to walk into the Safeway and you go to, get like meat or something, and I'm paying $10 for a pound of ground beef. What the fuck?
Yeah. No, it's terrifying, and if you know me, you know I love to cook.
Yeah.
It's my hobby.
Yeah. Well, it's our love language because I do the same thing.
Yeah, it's our lovely you and I discussed this. It's our love language.
Yes.
I buy higher end ingredients. I can't afford that anymore. Like,
No.
literally cannot afford to keep up how I have been cooking and eating for the past years. $10 for a pack of ground beef, okay, but then when every other item that you're looking for is also 50% higher in price and cost, or
Mhm.
40% higher in price and cost, it adds up. And between COVID hitting another spike in China, the Chinese ports, and the supply chain being disrupted from COVID, I love Instacart, guys. I am so lazy. I will pay anybody for convenience. As I'm sitting here saying I can't afford good ingredients, I will pay for the convenience for Instacart. And everything that I've had in my cart, I've had like 4 orders this week over the last week. I'm not even lying, because every single time I send someone out, everything's gone.
Yeah.
Everything's out of stock. I can't even get ham for a sandwich. Why?
Whoa,
Because
dude.
the deli shut down or they're out. Last night I had an Instacart order and the girl snapped a picture of the deli, where they have all the big pieces of meat and turkey, like whole things that they slice for you.
Mhm.
Empty. They have
Damn.
no deli foods, and that's at Kroger, that's at Publix, that's at Fresh Market, that's at all the major grocery chains. They are running out of a lot of items.
Damn, that's concerning to me. That's extremely concerning. The meal that I showed you that the consomme and all that rot that I was doing. Okay, yeah, like we were talking while I was shopping. I kid you not. All the ingredients for that meal ended up $89.16.
Wow.
That's a lot of fucking money for one meal. Granted, I was going all out and I was being fancy schmancy and all that, but I remember making that meal before, and it did not cost me $89.
And the cost of pork too is what I've noticed because don't
Ugh,
forget, pork used to be the cheapest you could buy. I could get a whole I love smoking. Like smoking is one of my hobbies. I have a nice smoker. I remember I would get a pork shoulder, like huge, huge, like 10, 12 pound pork shoulder for like $9,
wow.
$10. And now $30.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's just insanity. Chicken's gone like everything has gone up. I cook a lot of Italian food, which has a lot of ingredients. I make a lot of like bolognese or the cost of cheese even. Like everything is just so ungodly right now. I
It
feel you.
is. Well, if you think about it, China right now, as of 2020, produces 37% of pork. And guess who's next? The EU. EU right now is not doing so well.
Ugh.
Russia is fifth.
Hmm.
So,
Was it under Trump that were opened up the deal so that American pork could be sent to China for processing and then sent back to the US?
yeah,
Yeah. Guys, like, that's what's just so terrifying about all of this is as much as we want to be like, "God bless the USA, USA, USA," we are an interconnected world community here in every
we
sense of
are.
the word, and we need to really understand that to us, we're not in conflict with Ukraine, we're not seeing it, like, in person, but it's going to impact every aspect of our lives.
Right, everything is connected, and that's what's so interesting to me about geopolitics. As individual countries, there is a lot of countries that want to be extremely nationalistic and isolationist, and it's me, me, me. As a society, that is how we believe things work. But when you start looking into the nuances of geopolitics, you start to see that a country on its own will never survive. It just can't
Mm-mm.
because everything is connected. We need stuff from other people, and other people need stuff from us.
Yep.
If we want to close our borders and pretend that we are it's America, right? I myself agree. Yes, I love this country. I served, sacrificed my son, and I believe it. But I also believe that we cannot have this isolationist type of mentality because we're going to end up losing. And anybody that believes that we can, I'd hate to tell you, look into geopolitics, we just cannot. So if Ukraine and Russia are going at it, it is going to start to trickle up, and we are going to start to see, it's going to start impacting us because it's going to start impacting other countries, and those countries are going to impact us. It's kind of like tossing a rock into a puddle,
Mhm. Yeah.
and those concentric circles just start spreading, right?
Mhm.
So, and that's how this is going to be. It's Russia tossed a pebble into Ukraine, and it's just going to start getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
It is, and that's why it's so terrifying to me of NATO not getting involved is because, like, what's gonna happen if Putin runs over Ukraine, he goes into Finland or Bulgaria or makes it to Poland and takes all that space, like, then you guys are really gonna see hurt with food prices and energy prices and geopolitics. It's so fascinating because all of these factors are in
To the rest of the world, Putin going into Ukraine. Okay, let me say to the uneducated part of the world, Putin going into Ukraine looks like, well, it used to belong to him anyway, right?
don't forget today Rand Paul in Congress said that. He's like,
Okay,
"Well,
so there
I
you
would just
go.
like to state that, well, the countries that Putin's invading were part of the Soviet Union, and what? They're not right now. Sit down."
Okay, so we is in the world, if well, kind of like the Khmer Rouge, they were killing their own people. We didn't give a fuck, right? It wasn't until Germany started killing people from another country, then we started giving a fuck. Right now, that's how we're seeing it, I think, is that Russia is basically taking what belonged to them in the first place.
Yeah, and that's how what a lot of people did with Crimea. It's a crime, no pun intended, that people don't realize history of how the Crimea happened, right? And
Mhm.
it wasn't that Russia just came in and annexed it. It's like, "Oh, this is ours. We'll take this right back now." That's not what happened at all.
No.
Not what happened at all. You know, you have to understand geopolitics and history and demographics of a country and whatnot. Of Ukraine has a lot of Ukrainian nationals, right? And then also Russian separatists and,
Mhm.
East versus West almost. Like think of it as like a North versus South. Half of Ukraine wants to belong to Ukraine and be independent. And then a lot of Ukraine has a lot of Russian speakers, and wants to be part of Russia. And they've been constantly at odds. That's why originally their application for NATO failed, is because they had that plus a lot of
Right.
corruption and infighting, civil war type of stuff. So it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it's kinda a lot what happened also was, it's kind of let's pretend that, the North, once it had won, was telling the South, "You guys can't say y'all anymore, and you have to
Yep.
talk like we do."
Exactly.
That's basically what the Ukraine did. I think it was the very first, Democratic elected president made Ukrainian the national
Mhm.
language, basically telling all the Russian speakers that lived on the
Mhm.
northeast side, "You guys gotta give up your language. You're
Yeah.
Ukrainian now." And that's kinda fucked up.
No, it's super, super fucked up. Then you have Eastern Ukraine being like, "Hey, we live here too."
Mhm, mhm. And, a lot of those Eastern Ukrainians are basically becoming refugees into Russia. They're just stepping across the border.
Mhm.
And I personally wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them were stepping across the border so they could join the military, so they could come back and take their place.
Yep. Yep, exactly. I mean, it's not none of this is cut and dry, none of it's easy,
Mm-mm.
and it's really messy, and it has been for years.
It has been. But if you really think about it, like, kinda like you said in history, this whole area, yeah, from Bulgaria all the way up to Estonia has had such a fucked up history, constantly
Mhm.
fighting, constantly within themselves, with the countries around them, trying to protect themselves from Asia. I mean, this area, this, Eurasia, as it used to be called, has always had such a volatile history. And I think when Russia was in charge and it was the USSR, it had stability and it
Yep.
had an economy and it had these areas had a source of living and they had hope, I think. And, to them, it was freedom, right? Because freedom is subjective,
Yep, exactly.
right? So to them, they had the freedom and their needs were being met somewhat. They all had dreams of, if your kid was smart enough, they could go to Moscow and be trained and be something. And then if they were, you
Mhm.
yourself, the Politburo would see you as a favored family, you know? So
Mhm.
there was always that need of pleasing the higher ups, even though socialists and communists, and they didn't believe in that, right? Supposedly. But that's how it worked. So the stability that the USSR brought to these areas, I think that's what he's trying to do. And that's what he's promising.
Yep.
And I think that's what he's promised Belarus and Crimea. So I don't know if he gets Ukraine in and he's got all that money. It's Ukraine is the breadbasket right now.
Mhm, mhm.
So if you control the wheat and you control the gas and everything, I could see some people, some of those countries, the littler ones going, we had it really good when we were living it with mom and dad. Yeah, kinda like the, I mean, no offense, but kinda like to the millennials going back home to live with mom and dad.
No, I can absolutely see that.
That's basically it, right?
It's all a mess. Like I said, I'm just keeping a close eye on the news and trying to forge my own food supply.
Hey, it's not a bad idea. Get yourself some chickens.
I wish. I live in a suburb about 10 miles outside of downtown Nashville, and yeah, I don't think the chickens would work.
That's too bad because 'cause they're fun. It's like they're your own little TV show sometimes, I swear. But yeah.
Well, Iris, thank you again for coming on. It's been a blast. It's so rare that I actually get to like nerd and geek out on something that I find so interesting.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was great.
You are the absolute first person that I thought of. That's all for today, guys. Stay safe and get your own food supply.
Please.
Please. Until next time.